Peruvian healthcare workers mobilized on Wednesday to support a law that seeks to provide better working conditions. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has reiterated the moves of the United States and European governments to destabilize the country. South Africa's international borders are to reopen starting next month, while visitors must provide a negative COVID-19 test result upon arrival in the country. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Peru, where healthcare workers gathered in front of the Constitutional Court on Wednesday to support a law that seeks to provide better working conditions. The Peruvian Congress approved Law 31039, which allows medical and non-medical health professionals to be automatically and exceptionally promoted based on the number of years of service. The law also establishes the regulations of the process to change occupation, as well as the appointment and job security of health professionals, technicians, assistants and administrative staff. Peruvian President Martin Vizcarra has blocked the law, claiming it is unconstitutional. The health union coordinator has called for national demonstrations in order to demand labour rights which have been violated in the sector. According to reports on social media, at least one demonstrator was arrested in the city of Cusco.
We are gathered here to defend Law 31039, which is a law that President Vizcarra intends to declare unconstitutional, so he filed a suit against the Constitutional Court.
Ecuador's trade union centre, the Unitary Front of Workers, called for a fresh day of protest this Wednesday to defend public education and workers' rights. Workers, students and social organisations are marching in rejection of the neoliberal measures implemented by the Lenin Moreno government. Social organisations have rejected public budget cuts in education and the privatisation of several companies, among other measures. They also denounced the mass layoffs of at least 1 million public sector workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Teachers also stressed that Moreno's policies are worsening the crisis in the public education system and that they will keep fighting in defence of the rights to education, health and work. On Tuesday evening, during a session of the Colombian Senate, the Minister of Defense admitted that police had killed lawyer Javier Ordóñez on September 9th in Bogotá. The murder sparked widespread protests against police brutality. Several lawmakers have called for the minister to resign, as well as officials of the police force.
Some policemen killed a Colombian citizen, disgraced the uniform, violated the rules of ethical behavior, disregarded all the educational effort of the institution. The decisions regarding these officers are already being made, and of course, the police is willing to continue contributing to the proper progress of the investigations, so that the criminal authorities make the corresponding decisions according to the level of responsibility they have. Likewise, the police has been acting with other police officers who may be allegedly involved in violations of the law or unawareness of the regulations, and the police, as it has done within its competence so far, will continue to do so.
And Colombia's National Unemployment Committee has called for fresh, peaceful demonstrations against police brutality this Wednesday. The committee, made up of trade unions and student movements, called for a nationwide pot-banging protest in rejection of the continued acts of brutality and repression on the part of police, and also to denounce the crisis generated by the government's mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a statement, the committee is encouraging Colombians to mobilize in caravans to take to the streets in 5 days' time. The country has seen several days of violent clashes between protesters and police, as the population expresses its frustration over the escalating violence in the country. Venezuela has stressed its will to strengthen technical cooperation ties with the United Nations in the field of human rights, according to a diplomatic source. The Venezuelan representative to the UN in Geneva, Jorge Valero, considered the recognition of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, of the progress made in the country as constructive, as well as the impact of the unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States government. Based on Bachelet's report, Valero pointed out the intensification of the blockade imposed by the US administration through the implementation of new punitive actions. The nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize began this month. Official sources note that until now, the committee has received 318 proposals. Of this total, 211 are for individuals and 107 for organisations. A broad international group is calling on the Nobel Committee to award this prestigious prize to Cuba's Henry Reeve medical contingent. From Havana, our correspondent Nia Hurtado has the story.
People from all over the world support the petition to award the Nobel Peace Prize to the Cuban Medical Brigade Henry Reeve for its generous work in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, in spite of the United States campaign to discredit its health missions.
I think they deserve it. I feel they deserve it. The world thanks them, and therefore I think it would be fair for them to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
This is a campaign based on what Commander Fidel Castro said when on September 9, 2005, he created the Henry Reeve Brigade. This day was also historic because the first batch of Latin American physicians graduated from the Latin American School of Medicine. That extraordinary feat that only a sovereign, independent, socialist country like Cuba, a poor country of the third world, has been able to do, and does until today.
Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Cuba has sent medical brigades to more than 60 countries affected by the virus. This week, writers from all over the world that participated in the 30th International Poetry Festival in Medellin, Colombia, also supported this petition.
They've become a symbol of people who are fighting in the world, in countries that are not theirs, in countries where they were not born, but as a magnanimous expression of a new man who is born in Cuba and who has been dedicated to others, which have risked their life for the lives of many people, and that is the symbol we want to see in the world. And we join other thousands of people in the world that support this candidacy.
Meanwhile, the international solidarity movement has expressed its repudiation to Donald Trump's nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. The president of the country, which is the epicenter of the pandemic in the region, with more than 53,000 cases every day.
When we learned that Donald Trump, President of the United States, had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, we felt shame. But at the same time, we were not surprised that the person who nominated him is an extreme right-wing representative in the Norwegian parliament, who was already postulated him before. This deputy made this request based on something terrible for us, which is what we call the shame of the century, the so-called deal of the century.
According to many voices around the world, awarding these medical brigades dedication to others in the most dangerous situations is an act of justice and recognition that these doctors deserve.
Nayara Tardo, TeleSUR, La Habana.
Following a meeting with top officials on Wednesday, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko reiterated the intention of the United States and European governments to destabilize the country and impose a regime to their liking.
The so-called spontaneous mobilization of society, the birth of the so-called revolutionary situation, and the idea of the illegitimacy of the election are all myths. They are utterly destroyed by a deep analysis of the events that happened long before the election cycle of this year. The tactics of the organizers follow the classic American guidebook for color revolutions. This name has been brought up a lot lately, and I remind who it is. The famous Gene Sharp. Now we can look back and in detail break down each stage in the attempted destruction of our country, which we thankfully prevented and will continue to prevent. The joint campaign of the opposition built its tactics on the exploitation of the female image, which is traditionally venerated by Belarusians. This time it took on a farcical form. The marches of the trio were accompanied by euphoric slogans and unsophisticated chants like "We love, we can, we will win," as well as balloons and flashlights. We had already seen these tricks in the revolution in Georgia, Armenia, Serbia, and other countries.
Speaking before a United States Senate subcommittee hearing on the federal response to the coronavirus this Wednesday, the director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention noted that COVID-19 vaccinations could begin by the end of this year, but with a very limited supply and administered only to certain groups of vulnerable people.
I think there will be vaccine that initially be available sometime between November and December, but very limited supply and will have to be prioritized. If you're asking me when is it going to be generally available to the American public so we can begin to take advantage of vaccine to get back to our regular life, I think we're probably looking at late second quarter, third quarter 2021. Well, again, I'm going to commit, that we're going to continue to give Congress and the nation the best public health advice. We're not going to let political influence try to modulate that. Cut back. CDC recently did a survey, and it actually shocked me. Just a survey across our nation found that 31% of adults reported now significant anxiety and depressive disorders. So this is a significant comorbidity that has been negatively influenced by the COVID response.
This Wednesday, Sweden's health minister noted in a press briefing that developments related to the COVID-19 pandemic in the country are encouraging, pointing to a fall in transmission.
In Sweden, our development is still encouraging. The transmission of COVID-19 has continued to decrease, even when we have radically increased our testing. Last week, 142,000 tests for active COVID-19 was carried out, approximately a 50% increase in 2 weeks. The number of patients in intensive care in Sweden have dropped substantially. The spread in elderly care facilities have radically decreased. In the worst week of April, we had 845 new cases of infections at elderly care facilities, and last week we have 17 new cases. The mortality rates have also fallen radically. We do not have excess mortality in Sweden. Our levels are back to normal, and in August it was reported that we have mortality rates below normal figures.
Local authorities in the Chinese city of Wuhan have announced the resumption of international flights under the observance of strict health protocols. Meanwhile, the National Health Commission reported no new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases across China's mainland on Wednesday, representing a record 31 days without new local cases.
This is the first international passenger route to resume at Tianhe International Airport. 1 or 2 more other routes may resume this month. We strictly follow China's relevant COVID-19 prevention policies, carry out whole process health monitoring, and take management and control measures on inbound passengers to prevent the spread of the pandemic. Inbound travelers will also go through a 14-day intensive medical observation. For outbound passengers, after having their health code scanned, registering their health status and having their temperatures checked as stipulated in the National Epidemic Prevention and Control Policies, healthy passengers are allowed to leave the country. We strictly ensure the safety of passengers on both sides, inbound and outbound.
Japan's new Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga pledged Wednesday to keep coronavirus infections under control and kickstart an economy in recession.
I intend to continue the policies on which the Abe administration was making progress. This is the mission for which I was called. The priority is on measures against the coronavirus. I intend to avoid any large-scale epidemic like we have seen in the West and to protect the health and lives of Japanese citizens. The next priority is to strike a balance with the economic recovery. Otherwise, the daily lives of our citizens will not be sustainable.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced the reopening of the country's international borders starting next month, while noting visitors must provide a negative COVID-19 test result upon arrival. South Africa is the hardest hit nation by the coronavirus pandemic in the continent, having reported over 650,000 confirmed cases.
Travel may be restricted to and from certain countries that have high infection rates. A list of those countries will be published, and it will be based on the latest scientific data that we will be able to get. On arrival, travelers will need to present a negative COVID-19 test results not older than 72 hours from the time of departure, from whence they will have come from. We cannot afford a resurgence of infections in our country. A second wave would be devastating to our country and would again disrupt our lives and livelihoods. It is up to each and every one of us as South Africans to ensure that this does not happen.
Life does not stop in Syria in defiance of the imposed terrorist war, the Western economic blockade and the COVID-19 pandemic, all of which did not succeed in preventing schools from reopening their doors this September. Let's take a closer look.
In the midst of strict precautionary measures, some 13,280 schools reopened their doors to receive 3.8 million students in the different Syrian provinces. Educational authorities noted that they would apply the health protocol in all schools and educational centers to protect students and teachers from being infected by the novel coronavirus.
We have taken all the necessary health measures to start the school year. We have carried out sterilization campaigns in all schools. I have prepared everything students need in terms of face masks and disinfectants to guarantee their protection and safety, and all this with our own resources, despite the Western blockade imposed on Syria, which makes our work difficult.
The Syrian people resisted the war and emerged triumphant, and now we are facing the pandemic. And we're going to succeed, even though we suffer from the negative effects of the blockade, because we continue to offer free education and provide free books and school materials, as well as free healthcare and vaccination, and our students lack nothing.
The teaching day begins each morning with a play using dolls to explain to children the danger posed by the pandemic and the hygiene and health measures to be implemented to combat its spread. Demonstrative drawings are also part of these awareness and prevention sessions.
This prevention session will continue in all schools because it is essential to teach students about the ways to prevent this pandemic and help them overcome fear and fill them with hope that we will overcome this new challenge.
We instruct the children on how to wash their hands before and after each activity, be it at lunchtime or during recreation, because we focus on the hygienic aspect. And then we fulfill our main educational mission, since our main priority is to protect their health, and in this aspect we play a decisive role.
In addition to the pandemic, the Syrian education system is facing the impact of Western coercive measures. Still, the Syrian government, in addition to providing free education and medical care, refurbished over 63 schools in areas liberated from terrorist groups, an image that is completely opposed to that which reigns in the area still occupied by the United States, where these mercenaries have turned schools into prisons and military barracks and deprived hundreds of thousands of Syrian students of their education.
Demonstrators took to the streets in Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, this Wednesday to protest a hike in fuel and electricity prices. The protest was called by the Labour Civic Society Coalition's Joint Action Front, which has also rejected the privatisation and deregularisation policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in the country. The deputy chairman of the front noted that the Nigerian government continues to inflict suffering on the people as a result of its policy failures. Meanwhile, local police arrested several members of the Socialist Party of Nigeria, as well as journalists, including the party national secretary and youth leader. Fuel prices in Nigeria have risen from 38 cents over US dollar to 42 cents per litre, while electricity prices have doubled from 8 cents to 16 cents per kilowatt hour.
We're asking for better life because, look, Nigeria is, don't forget that we are still said to be the poverty capital of the world, and 110 million Nigerians are living on less than $2 a day. Life is extremely very difficult, and so you are now adding, imposing more hardship on the people of this country. It will not work.
Sudanese authorities announced Wednesday that they had confiscated a large amount of explosive materials, including the same compound that fueled the devastating blasts in Lebanon last month. Sudanese authorities arrested 41 people involved in the smuggling of the explosive materials. The public prosecutor explained in a press conference that his office had opened an investigation. According to Jamal Juma, a spokesman for the government paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, intelligence gathered since August on the movements of terrorist groups led to the arrests.
These dangerous materials are now kept in a safe place with the Rapid Support Forces. Forensic evidence analysis have been carried out and specific results have been reached, stating that these explosives are dangerous and could destroy the entire capital.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but we finish with a tribute to Chilean teacher, theatre director, poet, singer-songwriter and communist political activist Victor Jara, who was tortured and killed by the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship just days after the coup against President Salvador Allende on this day in 1973. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website and social media pages. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.
Yo no canto por cantar, ni por tener buena voz. Canto porque la guitarra tiene sentido y razón. Tiene corazón de tierra y alas de palomita. Es como el agua bendita, santigua glorias y penas. Aquí se encajó mi canto, como dijera Violeta. Guitarra trabajadora,